Students of South San Francisco, will you please give both of our guests a very warm welcome?
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Yeah? Great. Well, first of all, thank you, everyone, to all the board members, Ms. Lisa Normandy, and to Mr. Ashley Gray for all your hard work in preparing for this opportunity to come and to share with your students today. I really am grateful to be here and to share with all of you, so thank you very much. Before we begin, I just want to see how many of you have seen these words up here on this slide. Si se puede, or yes we can. Yeah? So it looks like all of you are familiar. So where are some of the places you've seen these words? Anybody want to shout it out?
TV shows.
So TV shows, movies, TV series. A little bit more clearly. Obama's campaign, there you go. So yeah, soccer games sometimes, marches, rallies. Last week I was hanging out with some elementary school students across the bay in Livermore, and they were telling me now that Dora the Explorer, SpongeBob, what's the other guy? Bob the Builder, they're all saying, si se puede, yes we can. And so I think it's pretty funny now to know that all of my younger cousins and all of our younger cousins and brothers and sisters are waking up in the morning and being re-inspired with this positive message. And it's also funny, though, because not everybody realizes that this simple phrase, si se puede, came from a very tough time when there wasn't a lot of hope and people were ready to give up in Arizona. The mid-70s, when they thought that there could be no change made for the farm workers. They felt like they had no money, they had no more energy, they were just tired and frustrated, and they hung their heads and said, no se puede, no se puede, you know. We can't do this, we can't do this. And my grandfather, he definitely understood the frustration and the impatience and the anger, but he also knew on a deeper level that if we really wanted to make the change that we were committed to seeing for our families, we had to wake up every morning with the attitude of si se puede, the attitude of yes we can. And so it's been really cool, you know, like all of you said, to see these words be used worldwide, really, for so many positive, life-affirming campaigns. So it's really neat to share that quick history. But these were some of the things that I learned growing up when I wasn't always in the classroom and on the weekends when I was picketing or marching, demonstrating on behalf of teachers or the school bus drivers or the garbage workers. And that's me on the left-hand side under the little mushroom cap with my cousins and my grandfather marching along, and again with my cousin and my brother. And so those are some of the lessons that we learned, again, outside of the classroom, beyond the books. And these were lessons that I didn't even always get a chance to learn or fully appreciate when I was going through college. So I'm very fortunate, again, for being able to grow up in this larger movement that makes me feel so at home and gives me deep roots and allows me to feel so much a part of community no matter where I go. But before we begin to talk about Cesar Chavez and the farm workers movement, I think we have to start with the basic question, right? Where does our food come from? We get so used to just walking into the grocery market 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, regardless of the seasons and no matter where we live, and we're able to enjoy this abundance of some of the most beautiful fruits and vegetables that mankind has ever known. And sometimes we forget to pause and to think when we're just rushing around trying to get around the other customers and, you know, getting glare in our eyes from these bright fluorescent lights and getting sprayed on by the misters. We forget about all the hard work that the farm workers are doing out there on a daily basis. We forget about the conditions that they have to endure, no shade, no water, and working tirelessly, trying to make as much money as they can for their families. And so that's why when I grew up at our table and wherever we shared meals with folks, we always remembered that if you've got food, you take the simple time to thank a farm worker. And it was pretty neat because just the other day on Facebook, actually, I don't know how many of you had seen this graphic that came up. Had any of you seen this? Yeah? Raise your hand. Let's see. Raise your hand. There's a good handful of you, right, who had seen this, right? And so I thought this was a pretty good, a funny, ironic way to really look at what's going on. You know, somehow we're able to give thanks to someone that we can't see, and we forget to give thanks to the neighbor who's doing this hard and important work. And so, you know, we always have to remember that whenever we sit down and we have the opportunity to enjoy a meal, we also have the opportunity to make sure that we're supporting practices that take care of workers and that also take care of the earth and our environment. But it's, again, you know, it's neat, it's amazing. I followed up a story on this picture right here, and we found out that it was shared by over 37 people on their Facebook page. And so if those 37,000 people shared that picture within, you know, a 36-hour time span, and they had an average of, say, 100 friends, you right there had the potential, the opportunity to share this with 3.7 million new people who would be aware of the hypocrisy sometimes when we stop to give thanks and we don't always really think about and follow through with the simple actions we can make on a daily basis that would really express our highest aspirations and our idealism for humanity. And so again, it's important, you know, to look at this in new and in fun, creative ways, because this has been going on for many countless generations. And it's a problem that won't be changed until we address it head on and until we look at that plight and we understand the choices that we're making as consumers and how that may impact and harm other people's lives and, again, the environment. So we have an incredible amount of responsibility for our ability to make these choices and to respond to the situation fully and to again, you know, to be that change that we want to see in the world. To be that change that we want to see in the world that Gandhi inspired in Martin Luther King Jr. and in my grandfather and in so many others who made incredible change for all of us here. That we don't always stop to take the time to pause, to think about, to consider how we could rededicate ourselves going forward. Growing up, my grandfather and their family were raised on a small farm out in the dusty area of Yuma, Arizona, on the border of California and Arizona and the U.S. and Mexico. And there they were able to enjoy the leisure of being able to raise their own food and to do the honorable work of providing for one's family and, if they were fortunate enough, for their relatives who lived nearby. But during this time, there was great hardship that affected many people across the nation, an era known as the Great Depression, which I'm sure many of you have studied. And many families lost their property, they lost their assets, and so they had to pick up and move. And so we learned about things that happened like the Great Migration from the South, the African Americans spreading all across North America, and the Okies moving out to the West. And we've even, you know, read about it in popular American literature, John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, and In Dubious Battle. And so growing up, my grandfather and their family, oh, can we go back one more? Thank you. Growing up, my grandfather and their family, after they had to give up their family farm and they had to go and start working all over California, they began working in the south in the deserts there near Yuma and Coachella, Calexico, Brawley, working down there, working in the dates, picking onions. They made their way along the coast to Oxnard, working in the berries and in the citrus, picking oranges and lemons, and then into the San Joaquin Valley near Delano, picking grapes, and making their way on up through Bakersfield and Fresno, doing almonds and peaches and apricots and pears, and eventually even coming all the way up to the Bay Area where they worked not too far away in San Jose and in Fremont and Dakota, picking cherries, and even as far up as Eureka, working in the lumber and timber yards. And so out there doing this hard work, having this firsthand experience, they knew that there were many children who had to work beside their parents so that they could provide. They knew the stories of parents who spent countless hours bending over and picking potatoes and cabbage and carrots and corn and stacking it on their back for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, before the sun came up and after the sun went down, from temperatures as low as freezing to as high as, triple-digit heat. And again, with no shade in sight, with no water, with no restrooms, sometimes causing people to suffer from heat stroke and even to die. And even recently, there's been farm workers who passed away, even though there's been changes made in the law books. But again, the most important and the toughest enforcer is the consumer. And that's what my grandfather knew, and that's what he learned from Gandhi, and that's what he learned from Martin Luther King Jr., and from so many others. That the people really do have the power, and we have the power in the choices we make. But again, growing up, living in these conditions, understanding, the heartbreak that came from doing this backbreaking work when you got home and your children were so excited to see you and they jumped into your arms that they couldn't even pick up their own kids to kiss them on the cheek and, to ask them how their day was at school. My grandfather knew that there was still just so much more that had to be done. And for a long time, they used to fly around spraying these pesticides right on top of the workers as they were working out there. How many of you know what pesticides are? Yeah? Okay, so we have a pretty good idea, right? The way I explain it to the elementary school students, in the cartoons, it's the bottles with the skull and bones, yeah? Those poisons, those toxic chemicals that they spray on the plants to kill the weeds, to keep the pests away. And so what's not to think that this pesticide residue won't affect us, the consumers, when it comes into our homes and into our supermarkets? And who's not to think that it won't affect the farm workers when they're working out there with no protective gear? And that it won't seep into our groundwater and affect, the families who are in the area drinking that water. And actually it did. Where my mother lives and where her family grew up in the mid-'80s, there was an incredible spike in the cancer rate. And they just didn't understand where it was coming from. New forms of cancer, children being born without arms or legs. And all they could understand was that these farm worker families, they lived in these pesticide clouds. They were so poorly paid that they didn't even have the opportunity to move away from the field sometimes. Sometimes they had to live right there on the edge of the fields in these little farm worker encampments that basically looked like tool shacks, because in actuality that's how they treated these individuals. They treated them as less than tools. And there, these families had to live sometimes with no windows to keep out the bugs or to keep out the cold, no restrooms, no running water, sometimes with just one bare light for the entire family to use. And again, these families who spent all day working to pick the fruits and vegetables that we enjoy and take for granted, that are there so fresh, so beautiful, so cheap, sometimes these families didn't even have enough to feed their own children. And so my grandfather used to laugh at that hypocrisy, that a family could spend all day long working and picking and providing for so many others and yet weren't able to provide for their own family. How can that be? So growing up and living this hard life, struggling, barely working to eke out an existence, following what was known as the circuit, going from one harvest to the next, from one region to the next, it came to the point, and it didn't even need to be explained. My grandfather knew that when he finished 8th grade, that was it. At that point, he was a man, and he had to go out and he had to provide. And he and so many others, and I'm sure it still happens to this day, have to quit before they can even put foot on a high school. And it's so sad, to understand that there's such great economic pressure out there that somebody has to give up that important investment, that great equalizer of education. But my grandfather, he was a really curious man. He loved learning, and so he was dedicated to being a lifelong learner. And even though he had to quit school in the 8th grade, he always made sure to pick up a book and to continue to enrich himself, so that he could share the knowledge and the wisdom and insight with those that he cared about. And so you see his office, and on the 3 walls facing him, the stacks of books that he had in his library, with sections covering California and American history, farm worker organizing history. He had sections dedicated to best business practices and direct marketing. He had sections dedicated to organic gardening, sections to Native American arts and crafts. Of course, he had a big section dedicated to Gandhi, to Martin Luther King Jr., to the Civil Rights Movement, and to his favorite Saint Francis of Assisi. And it was incredible to see, and even to go and to visit this library and to just to understand his appetite for knowledge and for wisdom that he found in the books. It was incredible. Even in all of my years of schooling and being able to go on and to receive a college degree, I still haven't even been able to touch this many amount of books or topics. And so again, it's always a great reminder to see folks who had less than you, but who realized they still had plenty, and who used that opportunity to go out and to work their hardest, and to show their thanks and to give their thanks for that opportunity, and to find ways to use that in service of their community. So as my grandfather was growing up as a young man, one of the things that he did was go off and serve in the Navy right at the end of World War II. And upon his return, he met my grandmother, Helen, who actually just recently turned 87, and I was very fortunate to be at her birthday. And when we were there, I was able to be with a lot of my aunts and uncles, who you'll see here, when they were much younger. And my father actually is the guy with the chubby cheeks on the bottom left. And I'm named after the other boy on the right-hand side. That's my Uncle Anthony. They call him Birdie. So that's who I was named after. And they began to start their family, and my grandfather was doing good, and he was providing, and he was helping them to start to take their first steps out of the fields. Because the second you could escape the hard work of doing farm work day in and day out, you were gone, and you didn't even think about looking back. There was a community over in San Jose, and it was known as Sal Si Puedes. Get out if you can, basically. Because the second you could get out of there, again, you just didn't even think about going back. So one of the things that my grandfather was able to do before he went out and became most famous for organizing farm workers, one of the things that he did, and actually nearby, was he worked for an organization called the CSO. And that organization is called the CSO, the Community Service Organization. And there he worked primarily around the Bay Area, and eventually later on down in Los Angeles, and became state director. But there he worked at the CSO, and he learned about the important principles that later guided him in his life as he went on to found the farm workers movement and to inspire so many others. There he learned that by going out and by sharing a bit of our time, by sharing a bit of our energy, and by sharing a bit of ourselves by asking questions, and sharing a bit of our resources when we can, we really do show how much we care, right? It's as simple as they remind me over in kindergarten when I visit the elementary school kids. Sharing is caring, right? How many of you heard that lesson growing up? Yeah? Okay. I just wanted to make sure that they didn't stop teaching that lesson after the Care Bears generation. Because that's me. I'm the Care Bears generation, so we were all about the sharing is caring and all that fun stuff. So my grandfather learned that by going out and by sharing, but most importantly, by asking questions and by listening. By remembering that we all have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? And so that we should probably listen as much as we talk. He would go and he would ask people questions about the situation they were living in, the conditions they faced on a daily basis. And as he told them, what you're describing to me holds you share in common with your neighbor, and these situations that you face day in and day out, these unite you. And this really is what makes up your community. This is who your community is. You're a community of working class people standing and struggling for your rights, to be respected, to be given the dignity you deserve. And so as we talk about our community, the situations we face, we've already begun to look at the good and the bad. We've already begun to organize ourselves, to focus our attention, to place our interests, to put all of our resources to changing these problems. And so my grandfather would help families register to vote. He would help them get into job training courses. He would help them take English courses. He would help them get the services that they needed in times of hardship, because he always used to remind us that there's never a time in our life that we don't need the help of another. And so we always made sure that he was looking for the next opportunity that he could be of service to his neighbor. Because it wasn't enough for him and his family to succeed and to make it out. He knew about all the other farm worker families that were just like his. And he didn't want to make it out and be successful and turn around and realize that he had nobody to celebrate that success with. He wanted his entire community to succeed. And so, following, again, on the principles and the examples of Gandhi, of Martin Luther King Jr., of the Kennedy family, following these great families of social justice and of civil rights, my grandfather made a big choice, and he left his first stable job he had. He left the first job where he didn't have to worry about paying for rent, paying for electricity, giving his kids the food and clothes that they needed to go and to study and to be successful. He quit his first job where he had a paid vacation, where he had benefits, and he went back right into the fields to go and to organize his community of farm workers. And it really was an incredible leap of faith. He went against 100 years of history. People who had better educations, people who had more resources, and people who frankly weren't brown, small farm workers like him. He went against all odds, even when his own family members called him crazy. They used to say, "Man, Cesar, you're crazy. What do you think you're going to do? Just one person, And he would say, "I don't know, but something has to be done. And if I don't start and try, then who else is going to? Nobody else is trying to change the situation." And so he quit, and he gave all that up. And over the years, there was even an opportunity to go and work with the Peace Corps in Central and Southern America. But he stayed committed to helping his community to have the respect and the dignity they deserve, to make sure that they knew they had power and they could assert their strength. And so he would go in this small little station wagon with my young uncle Anthony when he was a baby, driving all over the valley, talking to hundreds and thousands of farm workers, and sometimes only finding a handful who weren't afraid to stand up and to speak out. And those were the people that he used to go and he used to work with and he used to organize, and he used to have them be the champions and to rally their committees. And they were the ones who would later go on to lead the strike. Eventually, 3 years after he began his work founding the union in 1962, which is why this is the 50th year anniversary of the United Farm Workers, the Filipino farm workers went on strike. They said, "This is it. We're tired of this. Us Filipino workers get 10 cents less than the Mexican farm workers are getting, and what the Mexican farm workers are getting, they can't even support a family on. This is crazy. This is ludicrous." They quit, they walked out of the fields, and they said, "Forget it. Those grapes could die on the vine. We deserve more." And when my grandfather heard the news, and he realized that the Filipinos were on strike, he told the Mexican-American farm workers that he was mainly talking to, organizing, he told them, "That's it. We have to go join them. Even if there's only a handful of us, we have to join them. We have to join them in solidarity and unity. Because what they're standing up for is what we're in search of. We're looking for our civil rights. We're looking for our workers' rights. We want to uphold our human rights. It's the basic decency that we all deserve as humans." And so my grandfather had the Mexican Americans go out and join the Filipinos. And they worked together. And for many years they were striking and protesting in front of stores and out in the fields. But eventually there was so much violence inflicted upon the farm workers who were protesting nonviolently, and so many people had been killed and wounded and shot at, that my grandfather said, "That's it. We need to change our tactics. We need to be more creative. We need to find a better way to leverage what we have going here." And so again, going back to the history that he studied and that he learned on his own initiative, he learned from the examples of his contemporaries in the South, the civil rights movement. How many of you know Miss Rosa Parks? Yeah? Of course, right? So you guys know about the Montgomery bus boycott? Yeah, right? And how effective it was to later bring about the Civil Rights Act. And so my grandfather learned from this. He learned from the example of Gandhi doing the Salt March and how that later led to Indian independence from British colonial rule. And so he realized that they could use these tactics in a creative new way to help workers, not just in search of civil rights, but for workers' rights. And so he told farm workers and their families to go out and to tell all the families who are buying these grapes, we are the people who pick your grapes. These are what our families look like. These are the conditions we face. Do you want to continue supporting that? Or do you want to make the simple choice to not eat grapes? And so my grandfather went out to Philadelphia, Boston, New York City, Toronto, even as far as Western Europe. They were out there organizing, boycotting grapes. And at the height of the campaign, there were 17 million people across the US, Canada, and Western Europe who were choosing not to eat grapes as a form of saying that they stand for the rights and the respect and the dignity of farm workers. And so imagine, in 1975, 17 million people working together on one initiative. Before the internet, before Facebook, before Twitter, before YouTube. And I don't know how many of you have been reading the paper or keeping up with current events in the last year, but we'll know, or it's out there and it's widely discussed, the incredible power that these tools have had in creating change. In Tunisia, in Egypt, right now in Moscow, they're standing out there, tens of thousands of people protesting in minus 4 degrees Celsius weather, protesting in search of a better opportunity. And they're doing this, organizing through the power, the tools of the internet, of Facebook, of YouTube, of Twitter. Last year at this time, I was actually on my way to go visit my friend Brother David in Europe to go and help him with his lectures and his speaking schedule. And we were on our way to Tunisia to go to the Sahara Desert. And I'm getting ready to fly out of LAX, and I hear, boom, all of a sudden, Tunisia's up, and the revolution's going. I get on my plane, and by the time I land in Europe, I'm in Switzerland, I find out that we can't go to Tunisia, and so we book our trip to go to Egypt. The next day, we wake up, and we're on our way to Berlin to go to Germany, and we find out that now Egypt is up in revolution, right along with Tunisia. And so it was incredible just to imagine, and to consider how quickly we could influence so many people, the potential that we have at our fingertips. Because again, these revolutions are being led by young people, high school students, college students, the young idealists who want to make a better future, who want to have a better opportunity. And we're at the forefront of creating these new communities. And so again, I'm sorry, I take that side note just to remind you about, the incredible achievements that they made then and about what we're capable of doing now. And because of this hard work, Robert F. Kennedy said that what my grandfather did was heroic. And my grandfather used to laugh. He used to say, no, I'm no hero, whatever. I just said that. Something has to change, and I tapped into the same feeling that everybody else was having. I just had my finger on the pulse, And he said, it's not heroic. I could show you how quickly we could organize farm workers. In 2 minutes, I could show you how to organize farm workers, right? And I'll show you real quickly how we used to organize farm workers. It's called the farm workers hand clap. So I'm going to start an applause, and I want the rest of you to join in with me, and we'll see the power and how quickly we organize ourselves just in a simple hand clap. There you go, there you go. You could do some hooting and hollering. You could say, si se puede, yes we can. And that's how my grandfather used to show people that in less than a minute, he could change the tide of history, and he could organize people. He could get them working together. And he could demonstrate that power. Because if I were to stand up here and to clap alone, all off rhythm and weekly, it would mean nothing. But the second you all join in step with me, we're so much more powerful. And so it's incredible to know, what he was able to accomplish. Again, working with the support of these wonderful families, the Kennedy family, the King family, and going out and working on a daily basis to make conditions better, not only for farm workers, but for all people who are standing up for their dignity. One of the last things that my grandfather learned from Gandhi was a practice called fasting. And this was a personal endeavor that he took to really clarify his intentions and to make sure that all of his efforts were about helping all farm worker families. And to make sure that there was no ego, no pride, and that all of his achievements would always be given back to the farm workers and their families. Because that's what it was about. It wasn't about Cesar. It was about the farm workers and all the families that grew up just like his. And so he would do this to make sure that he was clear on his intentions and that the movement stayed dedicated to nonviolence, when at so many points they were always confronted with violence. And that's why he learned also from Gandhi the principle of moral jiu-jitsu. Always being able to know how you can take the higher ground on your opponent, and at the same time leverage the conversation and take it in the appropriate direction it should be going. To get away from all the posturing, to get away from all the debating, and to really get down to the root of the issue, to get down to the heart of the matter. So after all these years of this hard and important work, 30 years later, my grandfather passed away when I was 7 years old in 3rd grade, and 40,000 people showed up to march behind this pine casket in a small little farm worker town right where my mother grew up, and immediately the town doubled overnight. And when we show up, there's satellite trucks and this big circus tent set up, and I'm like, what's going on here? And then as I realized that all these people showed up to come and to pay tribute to my tata, who would balance a cup of tea on his head and walk by all 30 of his grandkids when we were hanging out for Christmas, and when he would stand on his head to get over the hiccups against the wall, and when my grandma would make fun of him for eating his rabbit vegetarian food. It was funny to think that all these people showed up to pay tribute to my tata for his life, and to say how much it meant to them. And a week later, I go to school, and they plant a tree at the school in honor of my tata. And then they start naming streets and parks and libraries. And this thing, postage stamp, what's that for? They have postage stamp named after my grandfather. And it's just crazy. And my grandmother goes to the White House, and they give her this award and thank her for all of her sacrifice and her dedication, standing by my grandfather, being his biggest supporter, being his strongest advocate. And all of a sudden they make this holiday in California, and we realize, wow, how great. A day to celebrate and to honor the legacy of the farm workers movement. It's not about Cesar Chavez, it's about the farm workers movement and what they stood for together. And so we said, this can't just be another day off. It's not just a day for kids to sleep in and to veg out on waffles, playing Xbox, doing whatever it is they do. We said, no, this should be a day for students to come and to learn about Cesar Chavez, to learn about the other icons like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi and so many others that inspired him in their movements and their dedication. So that this way we could go out and we could rededicate ourselves. We could redouble our efforts to the challenges that we all face here together. And so now I go and I get a chance to work with young people around this time of the year, planting gardens, just to bring some beauty to the campus, painting murals so that we could create the culture and the atmosphere and the values that they want to support on school, working around to clean up the local habitat and environment, sometimes doing e-waste recycling benefits, for the campus, other times planting gardens so that we could take the produce down to the local food bank, doing socks and winter gear drives, again, to take down to the homeless shelter. And other communities, we've been able to build parks overnight. We even built a skate park for some of the kids in Fresno. So again, there's many wonderful things that we can do as young people. And at the same time, it gives us the opportunity to learn and to take that initiative and to really understand the power that we have. And so I really want to thank you again for this opportunity to be here, to share a little bit of this personal history that I think is so close to many of us, and for reminding you as we go forward, following right after Martin Luther King Jr. Day, going towards Cesar Chavez Day, and moving on towards Earth Day, that there's many ways we can get involved and show that we care and show that young people can be the solutionaries that we need for today's day and age. We have great ideas, we have a big heart, and we can come up with creative solutions to address the problems that we're facing. So I want to thank you again, and I want to, remind you, dream big, aim high, follow your heart. Si se puede, yes we can. Thank you very much. Should I take questions?
35 minutes and 30
Did I do it? Perfect. So now that we have a little bit of time, I would love to try to answer questions. Again, I'm sorry I had to talk so much. 2 ears, 1 mouth. So I would love to listen to any of your questions.
So here's how we're going to do questions. If you have them, please raise your hand. I'll try to get to you, and then you can stand up, make sure that you introduce yourself, Mr. Chavez, and make sure that you state your question loudly so that everybody can hear you, and then maybe Mr. Chavez, you could repeat it.
Yeah. Don't worry. Don't be afraid.
Yes, sir.
I'm nervous.
My name is Cesar Chavez, and my question is, how can young students get involved when it seems like drastic measures are needed in today's problems?
Okay. So in summary, the classmate David asked, how can students get involved in a time when it seems like such drastic measures are needed? And you're right, drastic measures are needed. But that's why we need to organize in large numbers the way the internet allows us to, and to show people that by making our small individual choices, but doing it collectively in mind of the whole, we can make that big change and make incredible ripples. I like to share the example with the young people again, elementary school students, when we're hanging out, doing simple multiplication, whatever, talking about, 100,000 kids getting ready for school in the morning, and they're all there brushing their teeth, and if they took the time to turn off the water for 1 minute, they could save about 3 to 5 gallons of water. And so we say, if all of those students turned off the water while they were brushing their teeth for a minute, how many gallons of water could you save? And right there alone, you could save, 500,000 gallons of water if all the students had turned off their faucet for the minute they were brushing their teeth. Hopefully 2 minutes. But anyways, so I know that's kind of a small, maybe cheesy example about the things that young people can do to get involved. But I think those small examples and efforts show us and demonstrate to ourselves that we do have more capacity for change than it feels like. Because I know how insignificant and how small and how little we can feel compared to the problems that we face. But again, making those small individual choices is where it starts. Every day we have the opportunity to hopefully have 2 meals a day. And so that gives us an opportunity to choose 2 or 3 times a day what types of food providers we want to support. And again, there's many stops in our day where we're spending money, and that money goes to organizations, to different causes, different campaigns, and it ends up in Sacramento and in DC to lobby our interest. So as young people, even though you may not be able to vote, every dollar you spend is just as important as a vote, as we're also learning in this campaign, election cycle, and in many others. And so you could make the choice to support groups and organizations and causes that you care about. And you're also on the internet, just like me, reading Facebook, blah, 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 clicking around. And at the same time, you could start to sign online petitions to ban harmful pesticides that are sprayed all over our strawberries, ban methyl iodide. Go on to change.org. It just came out yesterday morning. You could sign up for that one. You could also start petitions like some second graders who want to ban what was it, telephone books, because it's such a waste. Every time I go to my mom's house, she's always getting another telephone book that she never uses. So think about all the trees we could save there, just to cut away from all that money that advertisers want to use to sell you more junk that you don't need. You could also choose to do an e-fast, to, you know, give up your cell phone, your computer, and all electronics for a weekend, and to see what that's like, you know. So there's a lot of just simple, creative ways that you could come up with to give yourself a new perspective. That's actually what respect means, to re-see, right? Specs, spectacles, and so to re-see is what respect is about. So.
Okay, thank you, David. Other questions from students?
All right.
Sir.
Yeah.
I was curious, what is your favorite moment or memory of your grandpa?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So Brian was asking my favorite moment growing up with my grandfather. I think everybody heard that. I think my favorite moment was one day, I don't know, it was probably a weekend or something. I was out playing around this small little community, La Paz, where we grew up, Peace. And when I was there playing, my grandfather was driving out to go in to meet some women organizers who wanted to come down and talk to him about what they were doing and ask him some questions. And so he stopped by the road and he honked and, you know, turned down his music and he said, "Come on, jump in the car with me, let's go. I have to go meet some people." And so I just jumped in the car and we were eating sunflower seeds and he turned the music back up and, you know, eating sunflower seeds and just listening to music, waiting to pick up these ladies. It felt kind of cool, you know. Grandpa picks you up. Well, it wasn't ladies, it was, you know, colleagues and important work. I was a young guy, I was a little kid, but it just felt cool to be a part of his daily business, you know, what he was doing. And I had no idea what he was really up to. So. Hi.
I'm Cornelia. I was wondering, did it ever feel like you wanted to give up? Like when it got hard? Or like you always like...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was difficult. He was always, you know, he would always, yeah, there was no doubt. There's definitely very discouraging times where he thought, you know, man, it would be easier if I wasn't doing this, you know. But he also realized that the work he was doing could make such a big difference for so many other families that he would never see. And the amount of gratification and the sense of meaning and purpose that brought to his life was something more than I probably even understand right now. And that allowed him to just be, you know, this little fireball of energy that just didn't stop until he stopped. But, yeah.
Okay, maybe we have time for one or two, and we're going to move to our next part of our program. Yes, ma'am?
Hi, I'm Tia. My question is, what made you want to continue your grandfather's legacy?
Well, okay, so the question was from Tia, and she asked what made me feel that I wanted to continue my grandfather's legacy. And, well, you know, when I was younger, when I was going through college, I used to ask myself, you know, if you weren't born so close to this great cause or legacy, you know, with the wonderful namesake, would you want to be a part of something like this? And generally, I answered yes, you know. Because, yeah, sometimes there's points where you're discouraged and it seemed tough, like, oh, that's a hard route to go. But then I thought about it and I said, no, I want to do something meaningful and important with my life, and I would like to go that route. And then I kind of didn't have any choice. I was young, I was in high school, I was actually a junior like some of you, and they needed somebody to go down to Cal State Fresno and to talk to college students and professors. And somehow they sent me. I don't think they told them how old I was, and I went down there and I visited and I shared, and it was really nice to be able to share this personal history from my simple perspective and not try to talk about anything I didn't know. And it was well received, and over the years as I've been going on as a student, and again understanding the importance of being, you know, civically involved and engaged, I realized that there was a great opportunity to go out and to talk to young people about these important values and to tell them that they have, you know, an opportunity in front of them to get involved to the classroom, and also, of course, beyond. And so I just kind of started doing this. The more I went out, the more positive reception there was, and the neat stories that I heard about young students who had heard the presentation, who were undocumented students and wanted to go to college, and then all of a sudden within a year took the project and shared it all over their school district, and their GPA shot up to 4.3, and then they went over to Harvard on a full ride. That made me feel pretty happy. And so I was like, cool, if that happens, maybe there's something to it, and we should go out and continue talking to more young people, because yeah, they're awesome and it's a good time. We could do a lot of good things together.
Great, good question. One more question over here, yes, sir.
My name is Dominic Goodman. I was wondering, along with your accomplishments, what do you think, or what message do you think should be emphasized on his impact on the world?
Well, I think thank you. It's a great question to wrap it all up on. So what message should be emphasized? So I think the most important message to be emphasized here today, like my grandfather, taught me and so many other students, and like I try to remember on a daily basis when I was driving to college in my car by myself, looking at all these farm workers doing this work and understanding I was only a generation away removed from doing that farm work. And even some of my own cousins still do that farm work in the summer. I realized, and what I want to share with you is, like he told me and so many others, the end of all education should surely be service to others. Because what a waste it would be if all this knowledge, this insight, this wisdom came to us over the years from our parents, our teachers, our elders, and from them, from their parents, teachers, and elders, and it just stopped at us, and we weren't able to pass it on. That's really what tradition is about. It's about passing on. It's not about hanging on and clinging to something, but it's about taking everything that's been given to you from the past to the present, and reworking that and remolding that for the times and how you need that, so you can pass it on even better to the next generation. So we should try to do that.
Okay, thank you for those questions.
Yeah. Oh, also the posters. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so we have one more piece. Mr. Chavez has been very generous, and he has given to us a lot of his wisdom. He's shared a lot of his personal family stories with us. His lessons on education and activism and the power of young people, I think, are very relevant to every person in this room, and I hope that I know that everybody was listening and internalizing those. Now is going to be an opportunity for us to get back, and the way it's going to work, if you would like to, you can raise your hand, you can call on you. You will stand up and introduce yourself. One word that describes Mr. Anthony Chavez or Cesar Chavez, and what that word means. And this is an opportunity to give back and show some gratitude for contribution both from Anthony as well as from his grandfather. Would anybody like to start to give back first?
Hold on, Fernando, 1 second here. I'm going to give you this. Good. It's on there.
The one word I like to describe is as devotion, because they spend your whole lives working for the people, like hardly thinking of yourselves and like putting yourselves on the line for everybody's sake.
So devotion.
Thank you.
Very well. Let's give a round of applause. Can you go loud?
Yeah. Okay. My name's Alex, and my word is dedication. Yeah, dedication. Because you can see that you really like what you do, and you work hard at it, and if you can touch us, then obviously you're doing good at it, and you really like it.
Great. That's
I think perseverance is something that you taught us and that you showed us and that your grandfather showed us as well. Because of that, you don't get anything done, and you don't do any work at all. And I feel like we need that to get through it right now for us and through our educational right and through our lives.
you and your grandfather are is hope for us. Being Colombian and Nicaraguense, I think that a lot of times us Latinos are seen as like with a negative and in a bad light, and I think you really give hope to all of us. So like one day it's going to be like you and your grandfather.
Yes, ma'am. Stand up. Real loud. So, motivation.
Inspiration.
Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is James, and my one word would be pride because what I learned today is if you're proud of who you are and what you stand for, you can really make a change in the whole world.
My word is inspiration, because you really inspired like me to really want to follow, like not just like rethink how I do things, and if I go like buy food or something, just like remember like the farmers and how the hard work that they put out for us.
My name is Andrea, and I would like to describe it as unselfish because a lot of the times I feel like we put ourselves before others, but your grandfather taught us that to make a change, we need to put others, like greater good, first before our own.
My name is Jordan. In one way, I would choose to describe you guys that you guys are very organized, because if you didn't organize everything, you can't do it alone. You need other people to help you.
Oh, my name is Anthony, and one word I would describe you, your grandfather is influential. You influence us to do so much better and help others and humble ourselves and, take cautious and pride for our work that we do.
My name is Nick, and one word I would use to describe your cause is revolutionary, because I think that what you've done has affected many, many people and in a positive way.
My name is Brianna, and I would my word is leader because, like you said, your grandfather said, is that if I don't start, then who will?
I think I'm going to take the opportunity to wrap up. And like many, as a history teacher, and we teach a lot about activists and activism. And I say this about most of our historical figures, and I say it about Mr. Anthony Chavez and his father. I would say that they're ordinary. They are ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. You learned about Cesar Chavez today. You've heard Mr. Anthony Chavez's story growing up. This could be anybody in this room. It could be anybody in this room. It could be you. They are ordinary people. They did extraordinary things, but it is within all of our grasp. We all have the opportunity to take an activist approach to how we live our lives. We all have that opportunity to do. And I think that is an underlying lesson that we should all realize as we walk out of here. So can we give one more very big round of applause?
And to your teachers also, to your teachers. So.